They called it a mercy assignment. They were wrong. My name is Vorik, and at the time this story begins, I held the rank of senior instructor at the Kelveron War Academy, which is a fancy way of saying I was paid to make young soldiers cry in 17 different gravitational environments. I was good at it. No, I was the best at it. 340 cadets had passed through my chamber, and 312 had washed out, and the 28 who survived still flinched when they heard my voice in a corridor. So when command handed me a thin little file with a human's name on it, I actually laughed, out loud, in front of my superior. Which in hindsight, was the first mistake of many. You want me, I said, to fail a human, from the survival program, the hardest one. I tapped the file with one claw. This is not an assignment, this is a vacation, because here is what everyone in the civilized galaxy knew about humans, back then. They were soft, squishy even. They lived a pathetic 80 or 90 years, which is roughly how long it takes a Kelveron to finish adolescence. They cried when they were sad, and they cried when they were happy, and, get this, they cried when they were angry, which is a design flaw so absurd that our biologists assumed it was a hoax for nearly a decade. They had no exoskeleton, no secondary heart, no venom, no armor plating, no useful number of limbs. Evolution had looked at the human and said, quite frankly, good enough, moving on. And now one of them had wandered into our most lethal training program like a small mammal strolling into a reactor core, and my job was simply to escort it back out before it embarrassed itself. Easy, clean, a vacation. I want you to remember how confident I was. I'm going to need you to remember it, so that later, when I am humiliated thoroughly and completely, you can enjoy it as much as the universe did. She arrived at the training hall the next cycle, and I'll be honest with you, my first thought was that someone had sent me a child by mistake. Tana Reyes, that was the name on the file. She was small even by human standards, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that were, I noted with professional disdain, far too calm for someone about to have the worst experience of her short little life. She stood at the entrance to my chamber and she looked up at me. I am 4 heads taller than the average human, with a jaw that can sever a support beam, and she did not gasp. She did not step back, she just looked, and then she nodded, like she was confirming an appointment. Your instructor Vorik, she said. Not a question. And you, I replied in the tone I reserve for things I am about to dismantle, are leaving. You simply haven't realized it yet. Most of your kind realize it within a day. The brighter ones realize it within an hour. I have a small wager with myself about which you'll be. She didn't answer that. She just walked to the center of the hall and waited. So I started with the introductory trial. Now, the introductory trial is not difficult. It's not supposed to be. It's designed to do one specific thing. It's designed to inform a cadet, in the gentlest way my chamber knows how, that the next several weeks are going to be a catalog of suffering. It involves a rotating platform, a series of strikes from automated arms calibrated to bruise but not break, and a simple objective: stay standing for 90 seconds. She stayed standing for 11. The arm caught her across the ribs and she went down hard, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction so warm and familiar that I nearly purred. There it was, the collapse. The moment the soft creature understands what it is and where it is, and that it does not belong here, except, and I cannot stress enough how much I disliked this part. She got up, not quickly, not gracefully. She pressed one hand against her ribs and her breath came out in a sharp little hiss, and her face did something complicated that I would later learn humans called deciding not to give up. And then she was on her feet again, swaying, fists raised, glaring at the platform like it had personally insulted her ancestors. That all? She said. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself it was shock, or stupidity, or the kind of false courage that breaks the moment real pain arrives. I told myself a great many things that first day. I was wrong about every single one of them. But I told myself anyway, because the alternative was admitting that the file in my hand had become considerably more interesting than I'd planned for it to be. So I brought her to the gravity chamber, which is where I usually win. Understand the gravity chamber. It is a sealed room in which I can adjust local gravity to anything from a feather's weight to the crushing pressure at the bottom of a gas giant. The standard washout protocol for a smaller species is simple. I set the gravity to roughly twice their body's tolerance, give them a meaningless task to complete, and wait for the moment they tap the floor to surrender. They always tap the floor. The body is honest even when the mind is stubborn. The body knows when it is being asked to die, and it will overrule any amount of foolish pride to avoid it. I set the chamber to a pressure suited for a creature twice her mass. The objective: cross the room, retrieve a marker, return it to the pedestal. A distance a healthy cadet covers in 30 seconds. She crossed it in 19 minutes. I watched the whole thing through the observation glass, and somewhere around minute 4, I stopped feeling smug, and somewhere around minute 9, I stopped taking notes, and somewhere around minute 14, I realized I was leaning forward with my claws pressed against the glass like an idiot fledgling at a sporting event. Her knees buckled. They did not give. Her arms shook so violently that the marker rattled in her grip like a loose bolt. Blood vessels burst in her eyes. Humans do that apparently when you ask too much of them, so that when she finally turned to face the pedestal, her eyes were red and wet and absolutely infuriatingly focused. She set the marker down, and then she looked up at the observation glass right at me, even though she couldn't possibly see through it, and she gave a small, exhausted, deeply sarcastic thumbs up. I increased the gravity. I'm not proud of it. I told her it was the next phase, but the truth is I'd been rattled, and a rattled instructor is a petty one. I pushed the pressure higher than protocol allowed, into a range that should have flattened her against the floor like a discarded ration wrapper. She fell to one knee. She stayed there trembling, her whole body folding under a weight that would have killed a soldier from most of the species I'd trained, and she said, through gritted teeth, in a voice I had to amplify just to hear, she said, "Is it supposed to be this easy?" I shut the chamber down. I told myself it was for safety reasons. It was not for safety reasons. It was because I had, for the first time in 340 cadets, become afraid that I might lose. When physical pressure fails, you go for the mind. Every instructor knows this. The body is a fortress, sure, but the mind is a wet little room full of doors that don't lock properly, and if you know where to push, you can get in. I'm very good at getting in. The psychological phase is where I have broken creatures that the gravity chamber couldn't dent. Warriors with armored hides and 3 hearts and battle commendations longer than my arm, I've watched them dissolve into sobbing wreckage in the isolation cells because the thing about pain is that you can brace against it, but the thing about loneliness is that it gets behind your bracing. So I put Tana Reyes in the dark, total sensory deprivation. No light, no sound, no sense of time. I disrupted her sleep in randomized fragments, never letting her body settle into rest. And between the fragments I fed false signals into the cell, whispers in languages she didn't speak, footsteps that approached and never arrived, the occasional voice of a loved one calling her name and then falling, very deliberately, silent. It's cruel. I know it's cruel. I had made my peace with cruelty a long time ago, because cruelty in a training chamber is a kindness on a battlefield, and that is the lie that lets people like me sleep at night. By the 3rd day, she was hallucinating. I could see it on the monitors. Her eyes tracking things that weren't there, her hands reaching for shapes in the dark. By every record I had ever kept, this was the part where they begged, where they pressed their faces to the cell door and pleaded for light, for sound, for any voice at all that would tell them they still existed. She didn't beg. Instead, in the middle of the 3rd night, she started talking. To herself, to the dark, to me maybe, since she'd long since guessed I was listening. She told stories about a place she called home, about people I didn't know, about a small body of water where she'd learned to swim and a meal her grandmother used to make that she described in such detail I could practically smell it through the monitors. She wasn't pleading, she was anchoring, she was using the only thing she had left, her own ridiculous, sentimental, overflowing inner life, as a rope to keep from being washed away. And when the false voices came, the ones designed to disorient her, she answered them, politely. Not real, she'd say, almost gently, like she was declining a salesperson. Nice try, though. And then she'd go back to her stories. I sat in the observation room that night for a long time. Bren found me there. Bren was another instructor, older than me, with a habit of being right in a way I found personally offensive. He looked at the monitor, and he looked at me and he said, "You're losing." "I'm gathering data," I said. "You're losing," he repeated, "and you don't even know what you're losing to. None of us do. We keep testing them like they're a fortress, looking for the wall to fall." He gestured at the screen, at the small human telling herself a story in the dark. "She's not a fortress, Vorik. She's water. You can't break water, you can only push it around and it just keeps coming back." I told him to leave. He left. I stayed and I listened to her talk until the night cycle ended and I started, for the first time in my long and decorated career, to take notes that weren't about how to make her quit. I should have stopped there. A wiser instructor would have stopped there. But I had been ordered to wash her out, and I had a reputation, and reputations are heavy things that drag you forward even when every instinct you have is screaming at you to turn around. So I moved to the pain trials. I won't describe everything. Some of it I'm still ashamed of. But you should understand what the neural stress sequence is, so that you understand what she did. It is, in simple terms, controlled agony, a direct stimulation of the nervous system that produces pain without injury, pain with no off switch, no adrenaline relief, no merciful unconsciousness at the far end. Just pure, sustained suffering, dialed to whatever intensity I choose, for as long as I choose. I have seen the toughest creatures in the sector reduced to screaming, weeping, soiling themselves and begging within minutes. There is no shame in it. The sequence is not a test of toughness. It was never a test of toughness. It is a demonstration, a way of showing a cadet exactly how much the universe can hurt them, so that they never ever take a battlefield lightly. I attached her to the array. I gave her an objective, a simple sequence of switches to flip in order while the sequence ran. It's not meant to be completed. It has never once been completed. It exists only to be abandoned, so that I can mark down the moment of abandonment and call it a washout. I started the sequence. She screamed. Of course she screamed. The sound of it went through me in a way I hadn't expected. A raw human sound with no dignity in it at all. The sound of a living thing in pure torment. Her body convulsed against the restraints. Tears and worse streamed down her face. Every monitor I had spiked into the red, and her vital signs danced along the edge of what a human body could endure. And I sat there with my claw on the dial, fully prepared to mark down the washout the moment she gave up. She flipped the first switch. I stared. I genuinely thought it was a spasm, a random convulsion that had happened to brush the panel. So I increased the intensity, just slightly, the way you'd nudge a stubborn machine. She screamed louder, and she flipped the second switch. I increased it again, third switch, again, fourth. She was screaming the entire time, screaming words now, screaming at me, calling me things that the translation matrix politely declined to render, and she did not stop flipping switches. Her hand was a claw of pure stubbornness, flipping switch after switch through a level of pain that should have erased every coherent thought in her skull. And somewhere in the middle of it I understood something that changed the shape of my entire life. She was not enduring the pain. That's what I'd assumed, that humans had some hidden tolerance, some secret armor I'd missed. That wasn't it at all. She felt every bit of it. She felt all of it, the full and total measure, more than I'd ever forced on a creature before. She wasn't unbreakable. She was breaking, and then choosing to continue anyway, over and over and over, in real time, 1,000 tiny acts of will, each one a fresh decision to keep going after the last one had shattered. I shut the sequence off. She flipped the final switch as it powered down, completing, for the first time in the history of my chamber, an objective that was designed to be impossible. And then she hung there in the restraints, gasping, soaked in sweat and tears, and through all of it, she started to laugh. A broken, exhausted, hysterical little laugh. "Did I?" she gasped. "Did I win that one, Teach?" I did not answer. I could not answer. I went back to my quarters, and I did not sleep, and I understood that I had been sent to break something that did not work the way breaking works. Selka summoned me the next morning. Selka was my superior, a creature of polished armor and polished ambition, the kind of officer who had never personally suffered for anything and therefore assumed suffering was something that happened to other, lesser beings. She had the human's file open in front of her, and her face had the particular stillness that in our species means displeasure. "She's still here," Selka said. "She's exceeding every benchmark," I said, and I heard the strange thing in my own voice, pride, maybe. "Senior officer, with respect, the data on this cadet is unlike anything in our records. If we graduate her, we are not graduating her." Selka's tone could have frozen a star. "Do you understand the politics, Vorik? Do you understand what it means for the Academy, for the species, if a human passes the program that 2/3 of our own people fail? They are a minor species, a client species. They are useful precisely because everyone agrees they are beneath us. A human graduate threatens that, and threats to that are threats to a great many careers, including, I would gently remind you, yours." I said nothing. "So you will fail her," Selka continued. "The final trial is yours to design. Design it to be unsurvivable, not lethal. We're not barbarians, and a dead human creates the wrong kind of paperwork, but unsurvivable. Engineer a scenario she cannot pass, document the failure, and end this. Am I understood? And here is the thing about me that I did not know until that moment. Sitting in Selka's frozen office with the weight of my whole career pressing down on me like the gravity chamber I'd been so proud of. I had spent my entire life believing that strength was the ability to make other creatures break. I was beginning to suspect I'd had it exactly backwards. Understood, I said. It was the second lie I'd told that week. It would not be the last. The final trial. I built it the way Selka wanted on paper. A rescue scenario, a simulated outpost under simulated bombardment, a malfunctioning maintenance drone trapped in a collapsing structure, a time limit calibrated to be a few seconds shorter than the fastest possible completion, unsurvivable by design, a trap dressed up as a test. I documented every parameter. I made it look perfect. And then I started the trial, and I sat in the observation room, and I watched Tana Reyes walk into a scenario engineered by me specifically to defeat her, and I waited to find out what kind of creature I actually was. She moved fast, faster than I'd thought a human could move, through the simulated smoke and the simulated fire, toward the trapped drone. She reached it with seconds to spare, seconds I had stolen from her, seconds I had carefully filed away so she'd come up just short. The objective was to retrieve the drone and reach the extraction point. She had time to grab it and run. Barely. If she moved perfectly, she might even make it, which meant I'd have to explain to Selka why the unsurvivable trial had been survived, and a small cowardly part of me hoped she'd just fail cleanly so I wouldn't have to choose anything at all. That's not what happened, because the drone was damaged, you see. Pinned under simulated debris sparking, its little voice unit emitting distress signals, and the scenario, the one I'd built, included a simulated second cadet, a trainee programmed into the exercise as set dressing, trapped on the far side of the collapse. Not part of the objective, not worth any points. A piece of background I'd added for realism and then forgotten entirely. Tana freed the drone, and then she heard the simulated cadet calling for help. And she stopped. I watched her look at the extraction point, her escape, her victory, her one slim chance to beat the impossible thing I'd made, and then I watched her look back toward the trapped cadet, the one that didn't matter, the one that would cost her the seconds she didn't have. Don't, I whispered alone in my observation room. Don't you dare. Go. Just go. Take the win. She went back for the cadet. She didn't make the time limit. Of course she didn't make the time limit. I'd built it so she couldn't, and then she'd spent her last precious seconds dragging a being that didn't exist out of a fire that wasn't real, because something in her would not, leave it behind. The simulation ended. The buzzer sounded. By every metric I had documented, by every parameter Selka had demanded, Tana Reyes had failed the final trial, and I had never in my life seen anything pass a test so completely. That was the moment I finally understood the human strength. It was never the gravity, or the pain, or the endless dark. Those were just the walls, and walls can be measured. The strength was the thing that made her turn around. The strength was that when the universe offered her survival at the cost of someone else, she looked at the deal, and she said no, without even slowing down to think about it. We had built an entire warrior culture on the principle that the strong survive. She'd walked into our chamber and demonstrated, without a single speech, that the strong go back. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about Bren and what he'd said about water. I thought about 312 cadets I'd washed out. And I wondered, for the first time, how many of them had been water too, and I'd simply called it failure because I didn't have the wisdom to call it anything else. And I thought about Selka, waiting for my documentation. Waiting for the lie that would end this, protect the careers, keep the small soft species in its small soft place. I had the report open in front of me. Failure, it said. Did not complete final trial within parameters. All I had to do was submit it. It was even true in the narrow, cowardly way that the worst lies are always technically true. I deleted it, and then I wrote a different one. I wrote down what actually happened, all of it. The gravity chamber and the dark and the pain trials and the rescue. I wrote that Tana Reyes had failed to meet the time limit on the final trial, and then I wrote that she had done so because she'd refused to abandon a fellow being to die, and that if the Kelvaron War Academy considered that a failure, then the Academy had no business calling itself a school for warriors, and might more honestly rebrand as a school for cowards with good posture. I may have been a little angry when I wrote it. The posture line was probably unprofessional. I left it in anyway. Selka was waiting for me. And Selka was not pleased, and Selka made her displeasure known at considerable volume. "You insubordinate fossil," she said, which I thought was rich coming from someone with a desk job. "You were given a direct order." "I was," I agreed, "and I followed it precisely. I designed an unsurvivable trial. I documented the result. The cadet did not survive it." I let that sit for a moment. "She also rendered it irrelevant, which the order did not account for, and which is, I'd argue, not my failure but yours. You will resubmit that report." "I will not. I will end your career. You're welcome to try." And here's the thing, I meant it. 340 cadets, and not one of them had taught me what one human had taught me in a handful of cycles, which is that there are things worth losing a career over, and that a strength which only knows how to protect itself was never really strength at all. End it if you like, Selka, but the report stands, and if you bury it, you should know that I kept a copy, and I have suddenly developed a great fondness for transparency in my old age. She didn't end my career. She couldn't. Not cleanly. Not with the report sitting where other officers could see it. Instead, there was an inquiry, and the inquiry became a debate, and the debate, to the absolute fury of a great many people with good posture and bad principles, concluded that Tana Reyes had in fact demonstrated the single most important quality a soldier could possess, and that the time limit, in light of everything, could go flip itself. She graduated, first human to pass the program. There was no ceremony, because the academy was too embarrassed to hold one, which I considered a victory in itself. I found her afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber where I'd spent so long trying to dismantle her. She looked terrible, thin, bruised, eyes still bloodshot, moving like every part of her hurt, which it almost certainly did. She looked up at me with that same maddening calm she'd had on the first day. "So," she said, "did I win, Teach?" And I, Vorik, senior instructor, breaker of 312 cadets, the best at making strong creatures cry in 17 gravitational environments. I started to laugh. A real one. The first in longer than I could remember. "No," I told her, "you didn't win. You did something considerably more annoying. You changed the rules." She grinned at that. "Yeah," she said. "We do that." We stood there a moment, the alien and the human, instructor and cadet, two creatures who had no business respecting each other and somehow did anyway. I didn't make a speech, neither did she. Some things don't need one. "Get some rest, Reyes," I said finally. "You look like something I'd wash out." "Couldn't though, could you?" she said, and limped off down the corridor, and I let her have the last word because she'd earned it, and because she was right. I tell this story now to every new batch of instructors who pass through my chamber. I'm older these days, slower, with a few more scars and considerably fewer certainties. They come in confident, the way I was confident, and they look at the records of the soft little species we used to laugh at, and I watch the smirks start to form, and I stop them right there. "Sit down," I say. "Let me tell you about a human named Tana Reyes. Let me tell you about everything I did to break her and everything she endured, and the exact moment I understood that I had spent my whole life mistaking cruelty for strength." And then I tell them the rule, the only rule that matters, the one I paid for with my arrogance and very nearly with my career. Do not, under any gravity, in any darkness, through any amount of pain, do not ever underestimate the species that feels every single thing all the way down and chooses to keep going anyway. They'll learn it the hard way if they don't. I certainly did. And honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.